Thanks very much. This is a talk I'm going to do. I was asked to talk about, there we go, sovereign interference in the startup sector, which isn't really, sovereign interference thankfully isn't really rife in the startup sector, but it's there's too much of it in Australia as it is. So I'm going to rant on NBN and Carmichael and a few bits and pieces. I'd like to tell a bit about myself. Next, please. First, is it working? I've got the clicker. Oh, right, there you go. It doesn't control my iPad, funny that. Right, so I just want to talk a bit about myself. First, just to know my background. I spent a lot of time in the early stage tech entrepreneurship space, and there's a lot of bullshit merchants in that space. And so I always tell people to ask about their background. So there's a bit about me, born and bred in regional Queensland, home of the Carmichael mine. Proud ex-regular soldier, two-time, I'm not a serial entrepreneur, I'm a plural entrepreneur. I've done it twice. Tech startup investor, B-grade structured reality TV star. I was Queensland's second chief entrepreneur. Absolute mad keen pilot, and if you want to see some of the biggest perversions of liberty, have a look at the general aviation sector in Australia. I love my kids and my wife. There's some of the companies that I invest in, so we invest across a broad range of things, mostly techie things. Just to set the ground, all right. I should keep an eye on that one, shouldn't I? Thanks, Sam. Just to set the ground and the importance of entrepreneurship. I get asked a lot of really weird questions as I travel around, and one of those things is are entrepreneurs born or made? And I don't know how you can tell, and I don't know how you can test it, but I do know how to identify an entrepreneur, and it's typically someone who's biased towards action. They want to get things done. They're not great planners, and that they may plan, but they don't spend too much time planning. So it's more doing, less planning. So, and all of the benefits we're getting through society at the moment with respect to the economy, a large chunk of them are coming through innovative small companies started by entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is one of the most important things because it keeps the big companies honest. It keeps the innovations flowing. And nowadays that's important because it's now really, really cheap to start a business. I'm in the tech space. Back in, probably when Matt started Freelancer, and definitely back when I started Pipe Networks and my previous businesses, you needed $500,000 to make a dent. You needed to buy your server licenses, you needed to buy your various parts of IT. Nowadays you can do that with probably $20,000 or even less. Every staff member needs a laptop, an Office 365 or a Gmail account, Dropbox, and you're off and running. That's really cool, so it's really cheap to start a business, but access to capital used to be one of our advantages. So now what we need to start a business is people with laptops, with good skills and with access to a network, and that includes everyone in the world, including the poorest people, well educated in the favelas of South America or anywhere in Ukraine. So right now we are so trade exposed in the only sector and the only industry in the world that's actually going ahead with real value creation, which is the tech sector. I want to talk a bit about governments and the difference between politicians and public servants because I've spent a year as Queensland's chief entrepreneur. And politicians are also nice. In fact, there's one not so nice one, which I'll show you later on. But I actually got a lot of respect for that man. They're also nice to your face. Excuse me if there's any kids in the room, but I learnt this term in America. It's called being grin-fucked. So they'll sit there and be nice to you, shake your hand and smile at you while just basically doing the opposite behind your back. But there's a difference between the politicians and the public servants. The public servants are typically hopeless. They don't know how to do things correctly. Whereas the politicians typically lie to your face and do the exact opposite. So I'm going to start with NBN. This talk used to be all NBN, and I've introduced some other stuff. So I think one of the biggest pieces of sovereign interference in the market in Australia has actually been NBN. It was actually disgusting. Pre-1997, when the Howard government introduced telecommunications regulations, and they basically deregulated the telecommunications industry with a Beazley bill. They changed it ever so slightly, but it was pretty well a Kim Beazley piece of innovation. It's the best telecommunications legislation in Australia ever. They've added to it since, and it's only got worse since. It was brought in because of, not just because we had to deregulate telecoms, but we had the shenanigans before that with respect to the HFC rollout, where Telstra was following Optus around and generally leading to sort of all sorts of crazy stuff. It ushered in the competitive carrier era, which was fantastic. I personally did very well out of the competitive carrier era, so I really enjoyed it. Through that space there, we now see the great companies around. My old business partner, Bevan, with Megaport and Superloop, you've got the Vocuses of the world and all sorts of things. Those companies have actually come out of that era there, and without that, we'd be at the mercy of an old Australian incumbent, Telstra, and a new incumbent from Singapore, Optus. In 2005, Telstra Americans came along, Saltra Heo and his merry bunch of dickheads. They came and basically totally changed the situation in Australia. And that was actually a really, really bad era in Australian telecoms. So what was the actual problem that actually caused us to get NBN? And I did a podcast with a young fella a few weeks back, probably 6 weeks ago. And I was talking about NBN in my usual sort of over-the-top way. And I mentioned, I said the reason, and I mentioned about how bad it was with Telecom 1983. And he had a giggle. And I thought, there's no way no one, this 23-year-old kid has any idea what Telecom is. And I asked him, and he said, no, he's just being polite by laughing. What was Telecom? We have NBN because we forgot how bad Telecom was. That's the reality. So what the hell was the problem? Everyone thought there was an issue with speed and there was an issue with ubiquity of access. The actual problem were the latent effects of monopoly. When NBN first started being talked about in 2005-06, we weren't even 8 years out of deregulation. This is infrastructure build. How the devil can we get anywhere in 8 years? We were exceptionally impatient and we've forgotten how bad Telecom 1983 was. So roughly in 2005, 2006, the first FTTM plan came out. Telstra's mad Americans once again. They actually proposed they were going to build this $4.1 billion fibre to the node network if they got a regulatory holiday and didn't have to give access to competitors. So that was a moment when John Howard heard it. Apparently he went incandescent with rage, which would have been fantastic to see. ALP comes to power, fibre to the home version 1 comes out with a competitive tender. And the competitive tenders came back as hopeless. So, gee whiz, this sounds easy. Hold my beer. Let's do it ourselves. A $40 billion project that we blew out to. The coalition got back into power in 13, I want to say. Yeah. And holy shit, what will this thing cost? And it will cost a lot. We started at $4.1 billion, went to $43 billion. Everyone who was clueful in the industry who's done it before knew it was going to cost over $70 billion. I don't quite believe 90, but yeah, definitely more than $70 billion. The MTM change that Malcolm Turnbull actually implemented brought it back down to about $50 billion. The problem with NBN is its budget impact. Actually, there was a great talk here before with Sir Roger Douglas, if he's in the room, we talked about balance sheets and do we have balance sheets in government. And unfortunately we don't, because none of the current budget deficits we have include any NBN spending other than paying the interest on the money we've borrowed. So that's the disgraceful part. The reason NBN goes slow is because we've actually, we've given it a requirement to have a fiscal return to keep the expense of it off the budget. Therefore they charge a lot of money in the core, and therefore everyone who buys that doesn't buy very much access and much speed, and it all goes slow. So NBN speed problems are actually an accounting issue. And if anyone says it's to do with fibre versus copper, you can discount them as a dickhead. The consequences out of the industry: loss of profit, restriction on Telstra Mobile. Telstra can't actually promote its mobile network as a broadband replacement. Who really cares? It sort of is. The HFC network, they've garnished HFC networks effectively off the operators. The copper network was removed. That we actually removed a competitive network. You want to keep the NBN honest? Leave a competitive network in place. Okay, it's old and slow. Well, good. It should be, it should be easy to compete against. There's new build restrictions. We actually have restrictions on people actually building a competitive network. You can't build a competitive network against NBN. How crazy is that? It's now scope creeped into business, which is disgraceful. The NBN satellite has actually frozen out satellite footprints from South Pacific Island nations. As such, they're now turning to China for telecoms, and as such, we're now giving them aid to build submarine cables. So how crazy is that? New infrastructure is stranded, hobbled. So the one way you can compete against NBN is with fixed wireless infrastructure. This isn't mobile, it's the same technology, but you use a set of antennas that are really quite directional, point at each other, costs about $500 an end, about $1,000 you can get a couple hundred megabits a second for no cost per month to use. NBN is now going to get priority access to that spectrum, so everyone else has been frozen out of it. Ridiculous. And future investment destruction. Right, the big problem with NBN is the fact that this is straight from the NBN annual report. This is, I've had to boil it down. So previously, before NBN, if you're a provider and you're going to provide access to someone at home, it would cost you, your cost of goods, about $20 a month. In the NBN corporate plan in 2018, that has to be 46. 2021 has to be 58, up to 78, up to 102. And every other nation on earth, that goes the other direction, it goes down. Here, legislated, that has to go up by that amount. That's the real problem. And this is the politician I hated that much, Stephen Conroy, who once said that he has that much power he could force the heads of telecommunications companies to come to his office wearing red underpants on their heads. That's the arrogance of Labor. That's why we need to keep government out of business. NBN is a bloody disaster. My next favourite topic is Carmichael Mine. Right. Carmichael is a little ex-cattle station just in central Queensland. I had a better one. I actually had a joke. I ran a competition. I sort of said, well, what's the collective for the black-throated finch? And my staff, I polled my staff, and the best one I came up with was a dinner box. So Carmichael is the most legal project in Australia. I don't really care for coal mines. I actually like my power cheap and reliable. I don't give a stuff what produces it, to be honest. But it's the most legal project in Australia. It's survived 11 High Court challenges, constantly moving environmental goalposts. Anastasia Palaszczuk put a purpose design expert panel in there which doubled as a kangaroo court to delay this project. Prior to the election result, they were looking at a 5-year delay to count finches. The Olive Downs mine next door got approved with no condition, with sensible conditions and straight away. The Townsville Ring Road got approved. So this is the same finch territory. So this is what it's sovereign interference, the most legal project in Australia. But I reckon after the last couple of days, that little black-throated finch is feeling pretty endangered. Financial services, the Banking Royal Commission. How much time do I have, mate?
No, 5 minutes is good.
Cool. Banking Royal Commission. I can't believe, that our Corporations Act is 3,354 pages of crap. Sweden's is 200. Will adding any more work? This is what I can't understand after sitting through all the rubbish and all the futility of that Royal Commission. It's incredible. Bank CEOs don't care about the law. They've actually proved that. They don't give a stuff about it. There's only one thing they care about. They care about losing revenue. The way you do that is you actually threaten them with an entrepreneur. You have someone who come in who'll an innovative financial service who will take that business. I invest in companies like that. If I'm told that to get across the line, I've got to staff a $30 million a year compliance team, I'm not going to do it. So we're locking out innovation because the bar to get over for compliance is silly. If we want to fix banking, we'd make it that competitive, it'd make your head spin. The bad ones will go away, the good ones will stay. We'll get a lot better services. Financial services licensing, we're trying to raise an investment product at the moment that we're only going to sell to really rich people, the sophisticated investor essentially. That means basically there's a gold card investment rule. If you have wealth over $2.5 million, I think it is, then supposedly the rules don't apply to you, or the consumer rules don't apply to you because you're wealthy enough to go and get your own advice. That's the general consensus of the rules. We've now spent $70,000 trying to craft a product for only sophisticated investors. It'll probably cost us $60,000 a year to maintain it. The financial services licensing in this country is ridiculous. One close to home for me, Uber and Lime scooters. So the Uber and any rideshare service is incredible. The overreaction to that is a direct, what we're talking about, I suppose, with respect to sovereign interference. I've got the New York City monthly taxi pickups. What you've actually seen there's about 3 million rides per month being added to that market. So for all the bleating about the destruction of the taxi industry, we've actually added to that. Now that's actually created other problems in the cities. If you go to San Francisco now, congestion's horrible, and 3/4 of goddamn Uber and Lyft. So there are other issues involved. In Brisbane, Lime scooters, love them. City Cycle was this horrible thing. Brisbane City Council put a 30-year tender out. These big, fat, ugly pink bikes. They do and recently they just celebrated doing 134,000 rides in a 2-month period. In the same 2-month period, the first 2 months of Lime, they did 300,000. Lime just had their million ride scooter party the Tuesday night this week. Brisbane City Council came out and said, no worries at all, licensing is required. You have to apply to us, the people who actually have a financial outcome in City Cycle working for a licence to operate, running a closed tender. They went to cafes to sort of say, well, okay, if you don't want to leave these things on the footpath, let's go to the cafe, and the cafe can act as the place to park it, and they can act as a place to juice it, and you get extra business. Brisbane City Council said no, they'll have to reapply for their cafe licence, and we probably won't give it to them. So we need to get government out of business, and it is possible. So I presented these ones last year, or one might have been at Liberty Fest or Liberty Fest West. This is essentially a whole series of things that put out there by the George Washington Columbian College Arts and Business School. Government regulation can be removed, and this is what Donald Trump's been doing. So essentially in 2017, 2018, you've got the lowest regulation count for about 15 years with respect to final major rules published. Next, you've got there's 3 graphs here. So here's another one, which are significant final rules, which is the lowest ever. And here you've got the total number of pages published in the Federal Register, the lowest since 1974, just because he hasn't re-signed off on laws that need to be done by every president year on year. So we can remove these regulations, and I think part of what you're seeing in the US right now with respect to their economic revival or economic uplift is because there's less regulation. So it can be done, and I will say thanks and pass on to Matt.